So next, we will introduce the gold standards of food safety, which is called the HACCP. HACCP. I'm sure most of you have heard about this term through either at your workplace or through previous exposure to the food industries or companies. So HACCP is an internationally recognized system for reducing the risk of safety hazards in food. And we will introduce each letter in the HACCP and let you guys know what it stands for. So the first H, the H in the HACCP stands for hazard. So very straightforward. And the A in the HACCP stands for analysis. So we need to analyze the situation during a food processing procedure. The first C in HACCP stands for critical. The second C in the HACCP stands for control. And lastly, P stands for point. HACCP is a food safety management system which focuses on prevention strategies required to eliminate or reduce the impact of known hazards, or known as risks, that occur at specific points in the food production process. So the HACCP system requires that potential hazards are identified and controlled at specific points in the process. And it is based on 7 principles. First, conduct a hazard analysis. Second, identify critical control points. Third, establish critical limits. 5, establish monitoring system. 6, establish corrective action. Establish verification procedures, and establish documentation. So they are in total 7 principles. Sorry, I think I did the counting a little bit wrong. But you know there are 7 principles in the HACCP plan. So later we were going to watch a video which will introduce you the entire concept of HACCP, how to use HACCP, when to use HACCP, and each step within the 7 principles that are important to make sure food safety. So the HACCP video will last about 5 to 6 minutes. So we'll watch them, and then you will learn quite a bit from this video. So let's take a look at the HACCP video.
Welcome to HACCP Training by IQ Kitchen. HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. HACCP is an internationally recognized preventative system for assuring food safety. The most basic concept underlying HACCP is that of prevention. A hazard analysis is a science-based and systematic process to identify possible dangers to health. A critical control point is a point, step, or procedure at which control can be applied and a food safety hazard can be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to acceptable levels. HACCP is designed for use in the entire food industry, from growing, processing, manufacturing, distributing, and retailing food for consumption. HACCP is important in order to prevent foodborne illness, but also to reduce recalls and help companies save money. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 48 million people get sick due to one or another of 31 pathogens. About 128,000 people end up in the hospital, while 3,000 die annually. Between 1998 and 2008, 7,757 foodborne disease outbreaks were tracked. Poultry accounts for 19% of deaths due to foodborne illness related to Listeria and Salmonella. A 2014 estimate from the Department of Agriculture place the direct and indirect costs associated with illnesses caused by major foodborne pathogens at $15.6 billion per year. In 2012, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, GMA, and the Food Marketing Institute estimated that the average cost for a food recall in the United States was $10 million. Presently, the FDA gets involved in about 700 food-related recalls per year. HACCP was developed in the late 1950s by the Pillsbury Company, the Natick Research Laboratories, and NASA. They built a quality system to ensure food safety for the space program. In 1974, FDA incorporated HACCP in the regulations due to outbreaks of Clostridium botulinum in canned food. In 1993, the Codex Alimentarius Commission provided the first international definition for HACCP. And in 2000, ISO 22000 was developed with major contributions to food safety management systems. HACCP has become a global standard for food safety. A HACCP system requires that potential hazards are identified and controlled at specific points in the process. This includes biological, chemical, or physical hazards. Any company can use HACCP to minimize or eliminate food safety hazards in their product. HACCP is based on 7 principles. Principle 1. Conduct a hazard analysis. The application of this principle involves listing the steps in the process and identifying where significant hazards are likely to occur. Principle 2. Identify the critical control points. A critical control point, CCP, is a point, step, or procedure at which control can be applied and a food safety hazard can be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to acceptable levels. Principle 3. Establish critical limits. A critical limit, CL, is the maximum and/or minimum value to which a biological, chemical, or physical parameter must be controlled at a CCP to prevent, eliminate, or reduce to an acceptable level the occurrence of a food safety hazard. Principle 4. Monitor CCP. The HACCP team will describe monitoring procedures for the measurement of the critical limit at each critical control point. Principle 5. Establish corrective action. Corrective actions are the procedures that are followed when a deviation in a critical limit occurs. Also, an investigation must be conducted to determine what caused the deviation and how to prevent recurrence. Principle 6. Verification. Those activities other than monitoring that determine the validity of the HACCP plan and that the system is operating according to the plan. Principle 7. Documentation. A key component of the HACCP plan is recording information that can be used to prove that the food was produced safely. The HACCP system must be built upon a solid foundation of prerequisite programs such as good manufacturing practices, GMPs, and standard operating procedures. They provide the basic environmental and operating conditions that are necessary for the production of safe, wholesome food. These are some examples for GMPs and SOPs. All prerequisite programs should be documented and regularly audited. The development of a HACCP plan is a logical step-by-step process. The 5 preliminary tasks need to be accomplished before the application of the HACCP principles to a specific product and the process are: 1. Assemble the HACCP team. Individuals from areas such as engineering, production, sanitation, quality assurance, and food microbiology who have a working knowledge of the various processing steps and operations in the facility who will be responsible for the HACCP plan. 2. Identify products, foods, processes that must be covered by the HACCP plan. Next, the HACCP team should write a categorization of the types of potentially hazardous foods that are covered. 3. Develop a list of ingredients, materials, equipment, and recipes formulations. Review everything that shows methods and control measures that address the food safety concerns involved. 4. Develop a process flow diagram. The HACCP team will draw a flow diagram that shows all the steps in the production process from receiving through shipping. 5. Verify the process flow diagram. The HACCP team can do this by having an impartial person do a walkthrough of the entire production process, checking to see if there is anything missing from the diagram.
So now we have finished watching the HACCP video, and I'm sure now you have more understanding of when you can apply the different, for example, the critical limits, what's called the CCP critical control points, and what kind of verifications you need to have, and the documentations that needs to be kept for future references. And now we will move on to introducing common food poisoning caused by bacteria. So next, I want to introduce to you the common food poisoning caused by bacteria. So there will be 6 common food poisoning bacteria that we'll introduce to you one by one in this course. And by learning about those bacteria, you will be able to better prevent the food poisoning incidents, and also you will know what to expect if unfortunately you happen to eat the contaminated food and got the bacteria. So we'll see who's first one. So the first one is called Vibrio parahemolyticus. Sorry, I will re-say this bacteria again. It's called Vibrio parahemolyticus. Vibrio parahemolyticus. So the first bacteria that we are going to introduce to you is the Vibrio parahemolyticus. So we will always begin with the characteristics of the bacteria. Number 1 is, so this type of bacteria is gram-negative bacteria, and it's curved, broad-shaped bacterium. It is also known for its oxidase-positive facultative anaerobe, meaning it does not like oxygen. That's what anaerobe means. It doesn't form any spore, and this type of bacteria is halophilic, meaning it likes salty environment. It can survive pretty well in salty environment. And it is heat intolerant, meaning if you cook it under 60 degrees Celsius for 5 minutes or under 80 degrees Celsius for 1 minute, you can actually destroy this bacteria. So it's heat intolerant. And next, it is very sensitive to low temperature. So this bacteria usually can't grow under 10 degrees Celsius. So if you freeze your food properly, you can avoid this type of bacteria. So what are some potential contaminated food that you want to watch out for? So usually the bacteria can be found in raw fish, shrimp, crab, oyster, and shellfish. If you ingest the food items mentioned above and that are cross-contaminated with other food, that can cause foodborne illnesses. And this type of bacteria caused foodborne illnesses usually found in Asian countries, so not very common in European countries. So because we're all in the Asian countries, we need to be extra careful about this bacteria. So what are some symptoms associated with this type of bacteria? First of all, you will get acute gastroenteritis. You will get diarrhea, abdominal cramps, possibly nausea and vomiting. You may have a headache. You may have fever and cold sweats. The incubation period for this bacteria usually is between 2 to 48 hours, and then you will develop symptoms. The duration of this food poisoning thing is 2 days, so it usually takes about 2 days to get over with. So it's not a very it's considered quick recovery time for most of the people, because some other food poisoning incidents may take longer to recover from it. So we learned about its characteristics, the type of food that we should be watch out for, and what can we do to prevent this type of bacteria in our food. First of all, which is the common universal law, is to practice good personal hygiene and proper hand washing. So make sure you wash your hands, you cover your nose and mouth when you sneeze, and proper cooking. So always cook your food well, never undercook any seafood or any meat, chicken, beef, lamb, and pork. Okay, so proper cooking is important. Make sure you check the internal temperature to know it's well done. Cooling down is important. Make sure you don't just leave food under room temperature, because this type of temperature can promote bacteria growth. Avoid eating raw seafood or not well cooked seafood is a key. So for a lot of us who are sushi eaters, this will be very difficult to do, because it means we shouldn't be eating all these delicious rolls and raw meat and raw shrimp. And lastly, you want to avoid cross-contamination. So one easy way to avoid cross-contamination is using different colors for the cutting boards. So you want to make sure at home you always have 2 or more cutting boards. One is for raw food, the other one is for ready-to-eat food. And of course, you can have more cutting boards for cutting the vegetables, cutting the fruits, and etc. So make sure more than 2 cutting boards at home is the key. Okay, then we'll move on to the next bacteria, which is called the Salmonella. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Salmonella, and it is also a gram-negative bacterium. It also doesn't like oxygen, so it's anaerobe. It's non-spore forming, and it's mesophilous. So it likes the moderate temperature. It can grow well between 20 to 45 degrees Celsius, and it's often found in human and chicken intestinal tract. Potential contaminated food. So if you happen to eat raw meat, chicken, eggs, milk, dairy food, pork, chocolate, and desserts, these are the food that Salmonella likes. So make sure you try to avoid eating these type of food I mentioned. Also, another way that you can possibly get in touch with Salmonella is that you have a and infected personnel that contaminated food if they don't wash their hands well after using the toilet, and then they go handle the food. So make sure you don't get sick staff working in the kitchen. Is what our experience told us not to do that. It's a bad idea because your sick staff can contaminate the food that they are preparing. Symptoms associated with salmonella includes watery stools, abdominal cramps, nausea, vomiting, fever can go as high as 40 degrees Celsius. Also, you'll get a headache. Incubation time is usually between 6 to 72 hours. And duration of the foodborne illness is 2 to 3 days. So you can get over with it less than 3 days. I should say within 3 days. So how do we prevent salmonella? First of all, cook your food well. Always cook your food well, heat it well, test the intestinal temperature, like we said. The internal temperature, like we said. So cook your chicken until it reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Practice proper hand wash. Wash and sanitize all the surfaces that come in contact with raw food. So once you use this cutting board to preparing your ground beef or your raw fish or raw shrimp, any raw fish, anything raw, make sure you wash the cutting board with soap or detergent, or you sanitize it after use. Avoid the carriers for salmonella, for example, rats and flies. Now we will take a short break before we move on to introduce you the third type of bacteria, which is Clostridium botulinum. So let's take a short break and we'll come back.